Hello, everybody. My clock says it's 3 p.m. So I think we can start this webinar for language professionals planning to submit a project proposal for the ECML's program. Just a sign that you can hear me. That would be nice. Can you hear me? Yes? Excellent. Thanks a lot. All right. So welcome. On behalf of the director of the ECML, Sarah Breslin, joining us today from Strasbourg. Welcome on behalf of all ECML staff, colleagues supporting us for this webinar. My name is Susanna Slivensky. I'm the deputy director of the ECML, and I'm happy to guide you through this webinar today. A special thank you to our ECML consultants and project coordinators who are joining us today to talk about their experience with the ECML and their recommendations for you, our participants in this webinar, and prospective proposal writers. But before we start, a few technical points. We have interpretation for this webinar. Georg Geiderschik, many thanks for your professional assistance. You can select the globe button on the bottom of the screen for changing the language. Now, please do turn off your microphones and use the emoji hand if you want to speak. And please also use the chat for any questions or comments you may have. My colleague Katrin Seewald will try to respond to them. Now, we are all assuming that you are coming to this webinar with an idea in mind, maybe already with a concrete topic for a project and a target group, or you are thinking about taking a closer look at the themes offered in the ECML's call for proposal. Maybe you have heard from other colleagues that running an ECML project can be a springboard for professional development, or you have already been involved in an ECML activity, for example, as a participant at a workshop. In any case, please note that in order to submit a project proposal, you must work in an ECML member state. But whatever your starting point today is, we are here to explain in some detail what the call is about and what a project looks like from the inside, which steps to take in order to develop a successful proposal. So this webinar is intended to boost your motivation to submit a proposal, but it also wants to give you a realistic and a first-hand information about becoming an ECML project coordinator. And now I'd like to give you an overview of the program we have prepared for you. And I share my screen for this purpose, which takes a second or two. Can you see my presentation? Okay, great. So this is today's program. I will do a rapid summary as an overview of the call. Then I hand over to Marisa Cavalli, our ECML consultant. And I wonder now if I started at the end. Yeah, I started at the end of my presentation, which I shouldn't. So I'm switching over now to the beginning of a presentation. Marisa Cavalli will give you key features of a project, the life of a project, what are the highlights of a project. She will then hand over to a current ECML project coordinator, Maria Stathopoulou from Greece, and she will talk about her experience, how she prepared her project and how retrospectively she considers certain aspects of a project that were then success factors. And after that, we will have David Newby, as our second ECML consultant, and he will discuss what makes a successful project proposal. So he will go into more details with regard to developing a project proposal. And we will then give Michael Armstrong, my colleague, the floor, who will explain to you the setup of our group work which we have envisaged for the second half of this webinar. That will start after a break of about 10 minutes. And then we will have about 45 minutes in groups. I think we will have 4 groups where we have group moderators, and as special guests, we have a current or a former project coordinator, and they will give you first-hand information and experience of their work with the ECML. Then we'll join again in the plenary. We will look at remaining questions, and I'll give an outlook, notably the timeline foreseen for the second half of the year, where we will look at project proposals and evaluate the incoming proposals. So that's the program for today. And I will start right away. I want to highlight the fact that the first series of presentations will be recorded, and they will be made available on the ECML website just after this webinar today. Okay, let me give you just very briefly an overview of our setup, our organizational framework, the Council of Europe and Language Education. On the left-hand side, you can see the logo of the Education Department, and Language Education is part of the Education Department. Education for democracy. It's just 3 words, but I think it says it all in a nutshell. The Council of Europe is working on education in order to promote democratic attitudes, democratic developments, sustainable democratic developments in Europe. There are 2 sectors in the Council working on languages, language education. There's the language policy sector in Strasbourg, and then there's the ECML based outside Strasbourg, outside France, in Austria, in Graz. Now, just to explain very rapidly the different roles of the 2 sectors, the language policy work in Strasbourg is putting language education on the political agenda. And here you can see the highest decision-making body of the Council of Europe, the Committee of Ministers, who is actually taking note of developments in language education for developments for language education for democracy. Now, we in Graz, we are working at the interface between policy, research, teacher education, and practice. Right away from the photo, you can see that this is a more informal setup, where we are welcoming on a regular basis practitioners, and that's teachers and language teachers from our member states, teacher educators, researchers, and also policymakers. And the ECML therefore provides a platform for discussion in order to support the implementation of language policy. Now, these 2 sectors or units are not standalone loose ends of work of the Council of Europe. In fact, there is a very recent document, a recommendation of the highest decision-making body of the Council of Europe, and that's the Committee of Ministers. It's a recommendation to member states on the importance of plurilingual and intercultural education for democratic culture. And this is really a reference document for the ECML's next program, the ECML program 2024 to 2027. And it's, I think it's a good reference document that shows how the 2 sectors actually work together hand in hand. Now, just as an overview of the process that we envisage with regard to projects, it's a ladder, so to speak, nominated participants from our member states, and they do look carefully at the proposed developments of projects, at the proposed materials, They pilot it, they review it, and they give feedback to project teams. And as a result of this process, we are then preparing publications of project work outputs that we are publishing on the ECML website, and we are supporting the dissemination of these materials with the help of our governing board and with the help of all our stakeholders. And then there's another step in this letter, and this is in fact an option that many of our project teams take on. And that's a format we call training and consultancy, where where our teams actually make themselves available to go to our member states and to offer training workshops and seminars in our member states. And I have the example of Christina Lechner, who together with her colleague went to Armenia, for example. Armenia requested support, in her case, for action research, and she carried out this workshop in Armenia, and you can see her audience here. So this, in a way, very briefly summarizes the steps of projects that we envisage and that we support, even at a point where projects are finalized, finished, and where publications are already available on the website. We continue supporting the dissemination of project results through training and consultancy. Now, very briefly, keywords that illustrate the themes we are offering for project proposals. These themes were identified in the process of a larger scale survey. Now, of course, you can look at these words just as loose keywords, but in fact, they are connected if you look carefully, and if you take into account reference documents such as the CFR and the companion volume, or the recommendations on plurilingual intercultural education that I've just introduced, or another reference document I recommend to have a look at, the reference framework of competences for democratic culture. The themes we are offering are interconnected, they overlap in a way, but they are at the same time very broad themes. I also want to stress that all themes and all work in proposed projects should definitely be linked to existing publications and existing projects. So it's important to have a look at our website to explore relevant thematic areas and to see to what extent the ECML has already worked in the area where you want to propose a project. But let's take a closer look at examples of themes. I've just taken a screenshot from the call website. You may recognize the first 2, 3, 4 themes. I don't want to go into any details with regard to themes. If at all, you can come back to specific themes in the group work foreseen in the second half of this webinar. But just to show you that, in fact, the themes are still very broad, and your project proposal would definitely need to be more specific than that. It needs to have a certain focus and a very clear target group. Now, I'd like to move on to the submission form, to the proposal form, which is available in a format for consultation at the website, and within the next few days, it will be available in a downloadable version where you can put in your information, save it, and then send your proposal to the ECML. I would just like to highlight a few key steps I think that are important to consider when you are developing a project proposal. First of all, select a theme. That may be an easy task, but then please do consider, why is your project needed? Which particular area of the theme would you like to work on? And why is what you have in mind really needed? And what exactly is needed? Is it a teacher education tool? Is it guidelines for policymakers who do work with people on the ground? Is it curriculum recommendation, or is it concrete classroom materials? What is needed and who is it for? So these four considerations or these considerations are really important and key steps to consider and to find good answers for when you complete the form and put in your proposal. All right, so this is the end of my overview, and I'm now happy to hand over to Marisa Cavalli, our ECML consultant, together with David Newby, who will speak later on in the program. And Marisa will talk about key features of the project. Marisa, the floor is yours.
Et voilà. Alors, sur cette image,
what you see here is a picture of the city of Graz, and you also see that there was a meeting where representatives of certain member states come together, and I'll be coming back to this. It was an expert meeting, and you see the consultants here. You see that we are always smiling even when we are quite tired, but it was active work here at the ECML as an example. So I'm a program consultant. First, I worked as a team member with the ECML. That was in the program 2008 to 11. And I later on coordinated a program of the ECML. Here you see some discussion points. First, how to build and manage a team, how to organize a project, and what should you expect from the project consultant. Here you see how a team is built up and managed. First, you have heard already that it's 4 team members, but those 4 members have different roles. There is the coordinator, she or he is in charge of the project towards the ECML. Then there is a website correspondent, he or she is in charge of the online documents. Then there is a second language documentalist. They have to make sure that there is a second language version of all the materials. And then there is one person in charge of communication. And she or he has to try and best possibly disseminate the project information. It is also possible to work with associate partners. You can always try, for instance, to find such resources which you can then activate. Those partners, though, are not financed by the ECML. So what you should do first is make sure that you are able to take on the required workload in terms of time. Because let me tell you that for coordination, it's 20 to 25 hours per month, more or less, even if there is quite some difference from certain time spans to others and phases of the project. And the other team members also maybe have to have 10 to 15 hours at their disposal, respectively. And it's also very interesting because we didn't say it at the beginning. You also have to make sure that you are able to fit these hours into your institutional workload, meaning your daily work, because the ECML still gives you a certain international renown and name, so you can always negotiate. Next point, how to find team members. Who should one ask? Where can they be found? You can, to do so, always consult the website of the ECML, and there you find member states, and if you click on a country there, you see a list of all the persons to be contacted. There are also some experts who can contribute to your project. How to manage languages in the team? Each and every project has to have two languages. The first one is English, the second one is either French or German. And some even have a trilingual website. One language is the main language of the project, and the second one is the so-called second language of the projects, and all materials have to be translated into that one as well. You have seen that on the form there is one question: which language do you use in your work? How then to build a team? Here I can just share some keywords which are maybe typical of a well-functioning team. Coordinators, of course, are always the kind of interface between the team and the ECML. But cooperation, of course, also means cooperation with experts of other member states. There is cooperation as to content and as to tools which we want to use in a project. What is necessary is solidarity, mutual confidence, and regular meetings. And that's a hint I can share with you. Regular meetings, not only the annual expert meeting, which will always be organized, but you should have more regular means of exchange, thus meetings. So the roles of the team members are not exactly defined. There is always a certain flexibility. And if it's necessary, for instance, that everyone works in both languages, then you have to see who is responsible for the two languages. So there might be difficulties because there are so different needs, different organizational items in the teams, but it is important to think of all of this. Two more slides, if I can. Here you see how a team is built and managed and how a project is organized. First, and we had said it, you have to choose an action plan. The next step then is to implement it. This requires cooperation and collaboration, of course, with the member states. And that by means of certain events, which I'm going to explain soon. Everything has to be documented, all activities, all processes along that timeline have to be documented. And of course, they always have to be evaluated in order to see that everything is in a sound balance and that no process is forgotten and so on. And then, of course, at the end, you have to produce useful results. That's, of course, one key element. Don't forget your target groups. Don't forget your addressees. Don't forget those for who you do such a project. And then here we have the famous events, as they are called in ECML speak. There is a meeting which is of utmost importance. You see here the most complex example, 4-year projects. There are network meetings, a network meeting where all countries come together. This takes place when a project takes shape already and where all member states are asked which adaptations, which reorientations of a project they might wish.
Data, ça va. Et enfin, la réunion d'atelier qui
And then you have
en partie composée d'experts de la
a
première
workshop,
réunion de
and
réseau
this
et qui pourra
workshop
être utile
can
pour
be
faciliter
very
également
useful for
la
all
possibilité
participants.
de
So
faire
it
des
is, of course,
webinaires
also
ou
possible to
ces
organize
événements,
webinars,
ces événements
webinars
ponctuels au début du projet pour
that
lancer
can be
l'appel
done at the
afin
beginning of a
pour
project,
lancer
for
les
instance, in
événements,
order
mais
to
également pour
launch
lancer
the
le
event,
projet.
but it can also be done
Et je
further
vous
on.
conseille vraiment de regarder attentivement les
I would really
documents
recommend
qui
to see
vous
in
ont été
detail all
proposés
these
sur le
documents
écran, comme
submitted
diapo,
to
pour
you.
voir si
And I believe
tout
on
est
my
bien.
last slide, we
On
can
aurait
also
besoin
see
maintenant
the program consultant's role. In this case, my role and David's role. Very briefly, we offer expertise in the area of languages. I work, for instance, in the field of bilingual education and construction of knowledge in 2 languages. Then, like David, we have 2 hats. We have a double role towards the teams and towards the ECML. That is, we support the teams, we help them, we try to be useful, we try to share with them knowledge which I might have or maybe not have, because sometimes the topics are so complex that the 2 consultants can, of course, not always have a total view of everything. Then we act as a link between the ECML and the teams, and we have the function of offering support to the teams, that is advice on planning or proofreading of texts, attending events, and so on. And last but not least, we ensure quality of a project.
Alors, je voulais seulement vous conseiller de marquer les documents importants pour vous.
So please do not forget the most important documents, the call for proposals, the proposal form, the website. You should also have found the website's address, and then also the call to the ECML. And now, very sorry about all these technical problems, and I've been a bit too fast, I know, but I should now like to hand over to Maria Stathopoulou. She is a researcher. She is Greek. In 2015, she wrote a book called Language Mediation in Foreign Language, Teaching and Testing. She's an expert in multilingual matters, and she has also contributed to the drafting of the companion volume, and she is now coordinator of a project on mediation in language learning and evaluation, ECML project. Now I'd like to hand over to Maria, and sorry again.
Thank you very much, Marisa, for this
Merci beaucoup.
Yes, we can. Yes, thank you, Maria.
Okay. Thank you very much, Susanna, for this overview. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be here and participate in this very interesting event, I think, and talk a little bit about my experience as an ECML project coordinator. So I would characterize this experience as a journey, actually. And a journey is not only about traveling from place to place, but it is also a process of, you know, a long and sometimes difficult process of personal change and development. And this is what happened to me. So in this presentation, I will say a few words about the application stage, let's say, and then I will be referring to the steps I followed. And I will briefly refer to our outputs and some activities and some highlights, the challenges that we faced, and how we felt throughout this process. The journey started with the submission of the proposal. So our journey had the name METLA. METLA is the acronym which stands for Mediation in Teaching, Learning and Assessment. This is the name of our project. So in 2019, after the proposal got accepted, the ECML staff welcomed us in Graz and presented us the overview of the program and offered some tips on how to organize our work, how we should collaborate, some tips, some very useful suggestions as to how a project can be organized. And actually that meeting was really helpful because it guided us throughout the process. Later on, 2021, next year, which was a really challenging year, not only for us, for everybody, it was COVID-19 that changed our plans and we had to adapt and to readapt. And so we went online. Our meetings were online through these new digital tools that we had to learn. And we had our expert meeting, the first expert meeting during that year. We had our network meeting, and it was the year that we collaborated a lot with practitioners and teachers, and of course, in an effort to produce our first outputs, the first drafts, let's say. I will be referring to the outputs in a bit, but just to give you a general idea as far as the timeline is concerned, let's say. So in 2021, it was a very a significant year for us because we had our workshop organized, and it was the first workshop organized by distance, actually, by the ECML. And during that year, we also decided to participate to conferences and training events, which were online again, but it was a good opportunity for us to get some feedback as a team, to present some first outputs, let's say, and get some feedback and get some first reactions by practitioners, by teachers who were interested in our project. And then the 2022, the last year of the project, we focused on the finalization of our outputs and to consider uploading on the website, etc. So let me say a few words about the main considerations why drafting the proposal. Regarding the process of submission, actually the proposal came after research on the field, in the field of mediation, which took a lot of years in Greece at the University of Athens. I had my PhD submitted by the supervision of Bessie Dendrinos, that we focused on this particular area. It was easy to choose the area, actually. It was mediation. So that was not difficult for us. Then I had to think of what that would be the aim of the project. Why to apply? Why to prepare something? And what this something will be? So that was the second question. What is the goal? And the third very basic question is which are the target groups, and what kind of material would be beneficial for these target groups? And of course, the last question and the last consideration was, who will be my team? This is a question that we will try to further discuss later with David in the breakout rooms. So after leaving Graz in November 2019, as I told you before in the coordinators meeting, I looked back and felt that this new journey, which was about to begin, would be a great opportunity for me to gain knowledge, to work collaboratively, and share experiences towards a common goal. And even this pandemic did not stop us to explore the possibilities of the new digital environment. I had the chance to meet and work with wonderful people. We developed strong bonds, and we're friends now. We were a really enthusiastic team. So, and of course, the ECML staff always supported our ideas. Now, a very short overview of our project. Here is our team, the core team on the left, and our associate partners on the right. We come from 6 different countries around Europe. There is a project Facebook page, which you can just find on the Facebook and find further information about the project, and of course the official website on the ECML site. Working languages were English and French. That means that everything that was produced in English was translated in French. And after, and the very interesting thing with the ECML project is that apart from your team, that you have to collaborate very closely, you expand the collaboration, you collaborate with more people around Europe who wish to pilot your materials. And so it's a chance to develop further relations there. And before closing this presentation, here are the outcomes, the outputs actually of our project. First of all, we aimed at developing a teaching guide for foreign language teachers of primary and secondary education who want to include cross-linguistic mediation in their teaching practices. So that was done in 2020, the first year of our project. So here we included information about the theory and practice of mediation. We included examples of mediation tasks in different languages, which draw upon the CFR companion volume, and some ideas and tips and suggestions on how the teachers can not only use the material, but also differentiate the materials for their different contexts and their different purposes. On the second year, we focused on the digital database. We created a repository, a data bank with more examples of tasks, of mediation tasks in different languages for different educational environments and for different proficiency levels. And finally, we created a resources website. The user can download everything from there, and there are some additional ideas on how mediation can be implemented. And that was actually what was the motivation for this application. We had the research data, but there was a need for teachers to know more about mediation and to implement mediation in their classrooms. So let me refer very briefly to what characterizes our outputs. First of all, for instance, mediation tasks, mediation activities, materials for learners. First of all, they are authentic, multimodal. We have tried really hard to include visuals, videos, infographics, and also to focus on learner-centeredness. We had included a variety of tasks for catering for different learning styles, attractive layout, of course, and reader friendliness. Now, regarding some, let's say, success factors, things that worked with us, in other words, we had a clear plan right from the beginning, an action plan, what we want to do, how, and the time span, let's say. So the plan is very important. And we also had regular meetings, as I told you before, online, but it worked just fine with us. And we also participated in events and conferences to get feedback from the participants. We organized in our context, in our universities, sessions, piloting sessions with teachers who evaluated our materials, piloted actually and evaluated our materials. And they filled in different sorts of questionnaires. And we also used digital tools in our project. And another important aspect was that we had a dissemination plan right from the beginning. And we contacted different people around Europe in order to work on mediation and on aspects that we may have not be aware of. So it was a learning process for us too. And I would like taking this opportunity to thank everybody in my team. And of course, our project consultant, David Newby. So I think that's all I had to say. Of course, I'm open to questions at the end to provide some further information regarding my experience as a project coordinator. So can I stop sharing and introduce David Newby, our next speaker, ECML consultant. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria. And I assume that you will be able to see my PowerPoint presentation. Am I right in making that assumption?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon. First of all, many thanks to Maria for her excellent presentation and indeed her excellent project. I think you got a very good flavor of what the project is about and why it was so successful. And of course, as she said, this project was carried out under extremely difficult conditions. None of their events actually happened in Graz due to the pandemic. So this took a special expertise. And as you mentioned, the online workshop, which was very difficult for you to organize, but was also very successful. Now, what am I going to do? In the next 10 minutes or so, I shall be sharing with you my thoughts on some of the factors that might contribute to making your project proposal successful. I'll be talking about what we have termed quality indicators, and will refer to some of the criteria that will be used in the selection process. You can find more information about the project selection criteria on page 19 of the call brochure. Those of you who are attending this webinar will probably be at different stages of planning your proposals. Some proposers may already have a fixed idea of the topic and structure of your project, as was the case when Maria submitted her project proposal 4 years ago. Others may have quite a good idea of a theme they would like to explore, but the details of the project may not yet be very concrete. Now, as you will have seen from the submission form, quite specific information is required if the project is to be assessed. So we hope that this webinar and the comprehensive information that you will find in the call brochure will help you put meat on the bones of your ideas and help you to develop your concept and to structure your project. Having said that, I suppose I should have a metaphor for the vegetarians amongst you rather than putting meat on the bones, but I'm afraid I haven't. So let's look at some of the factors that will be used as selection criteria to assess your project submission. First of all, the coordinator. What should you bring to your project? As Susanna has already said, clearly you should bring professional expertise and also experience. You will probably already be working in the thematic area you have chosen. You may have already taken initiatives in this area. For example, you might have published articles or given presentations on this topic. You might have participated in local projects within this area. Secondly, you may be involved in relevant networks at a local, regional, even international level. For example, teachers' associations. You might have taken part in national or international conferences relating to the topic. Thirdly, the question of management skills. You will need to indicate that you have some management experience, such as organizing teacher seminars or taking an active role in local projects. After all, you will be coordinating an international team, organizing a workshop with over 30 international participants, designing materials and other resources, etc. Now, one or two words about the coordinating team. Both Marissa and Maria have already given you detailed information about that, so I'll just make one or 2 points. First of all, the team members you select must be both professionally competent, and at the outset of the project, they must be clear about what being a team member entails, i.e. that they will need to take an active role at all stages of the project, and this can be quite demanding work. You will be working closely with your team for a period of up to 4 years. So ideally, your team would consist of people you have already had professional contact with or whose work you are familiar with. For example, you might have heard them give a presentation at a conference or read one of their articles. But since you're required to select a team from different countries, this is not always possible. As has already been said, if you need team members, the ECML is able to make certain suggestions. These will be discussed in the breakout session. Then a word or two about the theme of your project, already referred to by Susanna. As you know, the proposed themes should fall into the themes listed on pages 11 to 13 of the brochure. These themes have been identified as priorities in member states in a comprehensive survey that was conducted by the ECML last year. As Susanna has said, these priorities represent a broad range of themes. Some are topics that have been around in language education for many years, for example, CLIL or assessment. Others are relatively new, such as transversal competences, otherwise known as 21st century skills, or a new and currently very hot topic, artificial intelligence. Your chosen topic should fall within these general themes, but should have a very specific focus and clearly outlined aims. For example, if you select a theme such as 21st century skills, which covers a very broad area, it will be necessary to delineate which types of skills you would be focusing on. Additionally, your topic should be innovative. For example, an aspect which you regard as not yet having been given sufficient coverage in the language teaching community at large, or in past programs of the ECML. Also, it should be one which meets specific needs of the target group you have identified. It's useful to consult present and past projects of the ECML to see what topics have already been covered. You'll find links between themes in the ECML and Council of Europe resources in the appendix of the call brochure. Then we come to the target group or groups your project focuses on. In the call, 3 so-called orientations are listed. The first is policy implementation. For example, this may be the most relevant orientation if your project relates to certain aspects of curriculum development. The second is language teacher education, and the third, the practice of teaching and learning. As Susanna has said, it should be noted that whilst your main focus should be on one of these 3 groups, your project might include other groups, for example, both teacher education and, in addition, classroom teachers. The importance of this category is that it will determine the nature of the outputs of your project. I'll return to this aspect in a moment. Then we come to this question of alignment with Council of Europe values. Clearly, since the ECML is an institution of the Council of Europe, you will need to be familiar with its main resources, and indeed probably are, such as the Common European Framework, the companion volume, and so on. And to quote from the call brochure, your proposal will be underpinned by one or more of the principles in the Council of Europe's recommendation on the importance of plurilingual and intercultural education for democratic culture. These principles are listed on page 15 of the submission form, where you will also find a link to the recommendation. Perhaps it should be added that these principles are not exclusive or specific Council of Europe principles, but reflect values which have driven language education for many years. For example, encouraging learner autonomy and valuing the learner's voice, perhaps encouraging critical reflection on cultural diversity, and so on. In section C3 of the submission form, you are asked to state how your proposal aligns with the Council of Europe recommendations. A bit of a personal advice here is that don't treat these categories as cliches or as a quantitative checklist, but consider exactly how your project theme might relate to specific principles and state this explicitly in your submission. Then we come to the very important category, the outputs, and this is the final category that I shall refer to. This is a highly important category since it represents the resources that you will present to the target group of your project. At the conclusion of your project, it will be these outputs upon which the success of your project rests to a very large extent. One of the appealing aspects of an ECML project is that the results or outputs of your project will be available on the ECML website and accessible to a worldwide audience. For those of us working in the academic world who are used to producing papers in obscure journals, which hardly anyone ever reads, this has an obvious appeal. Perhaps here I'm talking about my own publications and not yours, I should add. Note that all the outputs of your project will be online and not paper versions, which has implications for the form of your outputs. In the past, projects have used a variety of output forms. For example, PDF texts outlining theoretical aspects of a topic, data banks of materials, videos for use in teacher education, models to be applied in various areas of language planning, guidelines for implementing innovative teaching approaches, etc., etc. It's useful to look at the ECML website at current and previous projects for ideas for outputs. What is essential is that the envisaged outputs meets the needs of the main target group you have identified. For example, if you are focusing on teachers, they may have different needs from the scientific communities some of us may be used to addressing in our research publications. Classroom teachers are likely to be principally interested in practical applications of your theme, and while this theoretical underpinning of your project is certainly important, they probably would not wish for the detailed bibliographical references found in academic studies, and will not wish to be burdened with terminology that is not immediately relevant. So finally, just one or two comments. From your submission form, it should emerge that you have a clear vision of the theme of your project, how it might be organized and proceed, and above all, the added value your project would bring to the target group or groups of language professionals you have identified. Clearly, some of the details of your submission may be a little speculative, but what you write in your submission form is not necessarily cast in stone. In consultation with the ECML, certain aspects may be modified or added to as the project proceeds. And with that, I think the monologues are at an end, and I'll hand over to Michael Armstrong, the head of administration of the ECML, who will explain how the work in the breakout groups will proceed. Thank you for your attention.